The selection hall smelled like desperation and cheap perfume. Clara stood against the back wall, arms crossed, watching the parade of younger women preen and pose like livestock at auction. 23 of them this time, arranged in a neat line down the center of the converted church basement, each one prettier than the last. Hair pinned just so, dresses borrowed or sewn in hopeful haste, smiles practiced in cracked mirrors. She'd stopped bothering with any of it 3 years ago. Next. The voice belonged to Samuel Garrett, one of the town's approved matchmakers, a thin man with a thinner mustache who took his role far too seriously. He gestured to a blonde girl who couldn't have been more than 19, fresh-faced, wide-eyed, scared. Clara knew that look. She'd worn it herself once. The girl stepped forward, hands trembling at her sides. Across from her stood a row of men, farmers mostly, a few shopkeepers, one blacksmith with burns scarring his forearms. They studied her like they were buying a horse, checking teeth, assessing hips, measuring worth in ways that made Clara's jaw clench. "She'll do," one of them finally said. A barrel-chested farmer named Dutch. He stepped forward without ceremony, and just like that, the girl's fate was sealed. No courtship, no choice, really. Just survival dressed up as opportunity. The girl's mother wept with relief in the corner. Clara looked away. This was how it worked in Redemption Creek, a frontier town carved out of Wyoming wilderness where women were scarce and men were plentiful. Every month, women traveled from back east, desperate or adventurous or simply out of options, hoping to find a husband. Any husband. Because out here, a woman alone didn't last long. Unless she was Clara. Next, another girl stepped forward. Brunette. Pretty enough. Too thin. The men passed her over in favor of a redhead with a fuller figure. Clara watched the brunette's face crumple, watched her retreat to the wall near where Clara stood. "It's not fair," the girl whispered, tears streaming. "I came all this way." Clara said nothing. Fair had nothing to do with it. The selections continued. One by one, the younger women were chosen, paired off with men they'd met 5 minutes ago, promised futures that might be prosperous or might be brutal. Out here, you never really knew until you were too far in to back out. Clara had stopped attending these events 2 years ago. She only came today because Mrs. Henderson had begged her to help arrange the hall, set up chairs, make sure there was coffee. Clara had agreed because Mrs. Henderson was kind and because saying no required explanations Clara didn't want to give. But she'd known, had known the moment she walked in, that this would be the same as every time before. The younger women chosen first. The prettier ones claimed quickly. Then the desperate scramble as the remaining men settled for whatever was left. And finally, the silence when Clara stood there, broad-shouldered and sharp-eyed, looking nothing like what these men wanted in a wife. They wanted soft. She was hard angles and calloused hands. They wanted delicate. She could outwork half the men in town, and everyone knew it. They wanted pretty. She was Clara. Practical, plain, unremarkable in every way that mattered here. Next, the line of women thinned. 15 left, then 10, then 5. Clara uncrossed her arms, preparing to slip out the back door. She'd done her duty, helped set up, played witness to another round of transactions disguised as romance. She didn't need to stay for the end. "Miss Whitlock," Samuel's voice stopped her. "You're still here." Every head turned. 23 women, most now paired off. A dozen men, the ones who'd been too slow or too particular. And Clara, caught halfway to the exit. "I was just leaving," she said evenly. "There are still men looking." Samuel gestured to the remaining bachelors, as if he were doing her a favor, as if she should be grateful for the leftovers. Clara's spine straightened. "I'm not interested. At your age, I said no." The words came out harder than she intended, sharp enough that Samuel flinched. A few of the men shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a squat rancher named Polk, actually laughed. "Probably for the best," Polk said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Need a wife, not a field hand." Heat crawled up Clara's neck, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd heard worse, been called worse. Words only hurt if you gave them permission. She turned to leave. "I'll take her." The voice came from the doorway, low, rough, like gravel scraping wood. Clara froze. Every person in the hall turned to look at the man who'd just spoken. He stood in the entrance, blocking most of the light. Tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed too broad for the doorframe. His coat was patched leather, worn thin at the elbows. His beard was untrimmed, more gray than black, and his eyes, Clara had never seen eyes that cold. Samuel recovered first. "Mr. Hale, I didn't realize you were attending today." "I wasn't planning to." The man, Hale, stepped into the hall, and Clara noticed he walked with a slight limp. Old injury, maybe. "But I need a wife. She'll do." He pointed directly at Clara. The room went silent. Clara stared at him. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." Hale moved closer, his gaze never leaving her face. Up close, she could see the scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his nose had been broken at least twice. He looked like a man who'd survived things most people didn't. "I'm heading back up to the valley in 2 hours. You can come with me, or you can stay here. Your choice." "That's—" Samuel started, but Hale cut him off. "I'm talking to her, not you." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't how it was supposed to work. There were protocols, procedures, at least a pretense of courtesy. You didn't just point at a woman and claim her like a stray dog. "I don't even know you," she said. "Rowan Hale. I trap up in the Northern Valley, live alone, need someone who can work hard and won't die when winter comes." He said it like he was listing supplies. "You look strong. You'll manage." "You think I'm going to ride off into the mountains with a stranger because he said I look strong? I think you're 30 if you're a day, and you've been standing here watching other women get picked over for years." His voice didn't rise, but somehow it filled the room. "I think you've got maybe 2 more years before this town stops pretending you're a selection option and starts treating you like charity work. And I think," his eyes narrowed slightly, "you're smart enough to know when you're out of better options." The words hit like fists, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Clara felt the stares of everyone in the hall, the pity from the women, the relief from the men who hadn't wanted her anyway, the slight smirk on Polk's face as he watched her get humiliated. She could walk away, should walk away. This man was offering her nothing but hard work and isolation. No promises of comfort or kindness, just survival. And yet, "What's in the valley?" she asked. Hale blinked, clearly surprised she hadn't slapped him or stormed out. "Cabin, trap lines, enough land to farm if you work it right. It's remote, snowed in half the year. Nearest neighbor is 2 days' ride." "And you want a wife because—" "I'm getting older, work's getting harder. I need someone who can pull their weight." He said it without shame, without trying to dress it up as anything more than what it was. "I don't need soft, I need capable. You look capable." Clara's mind raced. This was insane. Absolutely insane. She didn't know this man. Didn't know if he was honest or dangerous or completely unhinged. Going with him could mean anything. Hard work, abuse, death in the wilderness where no one would ever find her. But staying meant more of this. More selections where she stood against the wall, invisible. More years of watching younger women claim futures while she aged into irrelevance. More pitying looks from Mrs. Henderson and cutting remarks from men like Polk. "If I come," she said slowly, "I need to know what I'm walking into. Exactly what you expect." Hale considered this. "I expect you to work. Cook, clean, help with the trap lines when needed. Manage the cabin when I'm gone. In return, you get shelter, food, protection. I'm not a gentleman, but I'm not cruel. I won't hit you, won't force myself on you." He paused. "This isn't about romance. It's about survival. You help me live, I help you live. That's the arrangement. And if I can't keep up, then you'll die. Same as anyone else who goes into the mountains unprepared." He said it matter-of-factly, without malice. "But I don't think you will. You've got the look of someone who refuses to quit." Clara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together to hide it. Every rational part of her brain screamed to refuse, to walk out of this hall with whatever dignity she had left and figure out another way. There had to be another way. Except there wasn't. Not really. She'd tried for 5 years to make a life in Redemption Creek. Tried working at the general store until the owner's wife decided Clara was a threat. Tried cooking at the boarding house until they brought in a younger girl who smiled more. Tried everything that was supposed to work for a woman alone. None of it had. She looked at Rowan Hale, This scarred, blunt stranger who offered her nothing but brutal honesty and a chance to be needed instead of pitied. "When do we leave?" she asked. A ripple of shock went through the hall. Samuel actually gasped. One of the women whispered something that sounded like desperate. Hale's expression didn't change. 2 hours. Bring what you can carry. We're not coming back. I don't have much. Good. Less wait. He turned to Samuel. We'll need the marriage papers signed before we go. Now? Samuel sputtered. There are procedures, waiting periods. I've got a long ride ahead and winter coming early. Sign the papers or don't. Makes no difference to me if it's legal in town. But she's coming with me either way. Clara's breath caught. He was giving her an out, poorly disguised, but there. If she wanted to back out, this was the moment. Refuse the marriage and refuse the trip. She didn't refuse. Sign the papers, she told Samuel. I'm going. The ceremony, if it could be called that, took 11 minutes. Samuel produced the necessary documents with shaking hands, clearly disapproving but unwilling to challenge Rowan Hale directly. Clara suspected there was history there, something in the way Samuel's eyes darted away whenever Hale looked at him directly. There were no flowers, no vows beyond the legal minimum, no witnesses except the remaining selection attendees who watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. Do you, Clara Whitlock, take this man? I do. And do you, Rowan Hale? Yes. Samuel's pen scratched across the paper. Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I declare you married. No kiss, no celebration. Hale just nodded once and walked out. Clara stood there for a moment, marriage certificate in her hand, trying to process what she'd just done. Married to a stranger, leaving in less than 2 hours for a place she'd never seen. Clara? Mrs. Henderson approached, face pinched with worry. Are you certain about this? Mr. Hale he's not known for his gentle nature. Neither am I, Clara said. But the valley, it's so isolated. If something happens, something's been happening here for 5 years, Mrs. Henderson. This is just a different kind of something. The older woman's eyes glistened. You deserve better than this. Clara folded the marriage certificate carefully. Maybe, but this is what's available. She left the hall without looking back, walked the 3 blocks to the boarding house where she'd been renting a room, and packed everything she owned into 2 bags. It took less than 20 minutes, 5 years in Redemption Creek, and she could fit her entire life into 2 canvas bags. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Talbot, hovered in the doorway. I heard what you did, marrying that Hale man. News travels fast. He's dangerous, Clara. Everyone knows it. He killed a man once, up in the mountains. Maybe more than one. Clara paused, a dress halfway into her bag. Did he have reason? Does it matter? To me? Yes. Clara resumed packing. If he killed someone for sport, that's one thing. If he killed someone in self-defense, that's another. Context matters. You're playing with fire. I've been standing in ice for 5 years. Fire sounds like a welcome change. Mrs. Talbot left, muttering about foolish women and early graves. Clara finished packing, settled her small debt with the boarding house, and stood in the center of her empty room. This had been home. Not a good home, not even a comfortable one, but home nonetheless. She picked up her bags and walked out. Hale was waiting at the edge of town with 2 horses, a massive bay stallion for himself, and a smaller but sturdy-looking mare for her. He'd packed light, just saddlebags and a rifle strapped to his mount. He eyed her bags. That everything? Yes. Can you ride? Well enough. He handed her the mare's reins. Her name's Ash. She's steady. Don't be gentle with her. She respects firmness, not coddling. Clara tied her bags to the saddle and mounted. The mare shifted beneath her, testing, but settled when Clara's hand stayed firm on the reins. Hale watched this exchange with what might have been approval. We'll ride until dark. Make camp. Then another full day to the valley. You keep up, or you get left behind. I'll keep up. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded and spurred his horse forward. Clara followed. They left Redemption Creek behind without fanfare. No one came to see them off. No one waved goodbye. The town simply faded into the distance as they rode north into wilder country, where the trees grew thicker and the mountains loomed larger. For the first hour, they rode in complete silence. Clara focused on keeping pace, on the rhythm of Ash's gait, on not thinking too hard about what she'd just done. "You're quiet," Hale said eventually. "So are you." "I'm used to it." "You're not." He glanced back at her. "Most women can't stop talking when they're nervous." "I'm not nervous." "Liar." Clara's jaw tightened. "Fine. I'm nervous. But talking won't fix that, so why bother?" A sound escaped him, not quite a laugh, but close. "You've got spine. That's good. You'll need it." "For what, exactly?" "Everything." He guided his horse around a fallen log. "The valley isn't kind to the weak. Weather's brutal. Wildlife's dangerous. Isolation breaks most people. If you're expecting comfort or easy living, turn around now." "I'm not expecting anything," Clara said. "You made that clear at the selection." "Good." They rode on. The terrain grew rougher, less trail, more improvisation. Clara's thighs burned from gripping the saddle. Her back ached from sitting upright, but she didn't complain. Hale had been clear: keep up or get left behind. She'd keep up. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of orange and purple, Hale finally slowed. They'd reached a small clearing beside a narrow creek, sheltered by tall pines. "We'll camp here," he said, dismounting with practiced ease despite his limp. Clara slid off Ash, her legs nearly buckling. She steadied herself against the mare's flank, hoping Hale hadn't noticed. He had. "You'll adjust in a few days. For now, water the horses. I'll get the fire started." It wasn't a request. Clara led both horses to the creek, let them drink, then hobbled them the way she'd seen other travelers do. By the time she returned to the clearing, Hale had a small fire burning and was unpacking basic supplies. He handed her a piece of dried meat and some hardtack. "Eat." They ate in silence, sitting on opposite sides of the fire. Clara chewed the tough meat and studied her new husband, because that's what he was, legally at least. Husband. The word felt foreign. He caught her staring. "Questions?" 100 of them. "Ask." Clara considered. "Why me? You could have had your pick of younger women, prettier women." Hale poked at the fire with a stick. "I told you, I need capable, not pretty. Pretty doesn't help when you're snowed in for 3 months." "That's not an answer." He looked up, firelight catching in his gray eyes. "You want honesty?" "Always." "You looked like someone who'd already given up on soft things, who'd already figured out the world doesn't owe you gentle." He paused. "Most of those girls in that hall, they're chasing fairy tales, looking for a good man to save them, build them a nice life. That's fine for them. But I can't give that. I can give hard work, isolation, and survival. I needed someone who wouldn't break when she realized that. And you think I won't break? I think you've already been broken and put yourself back together. That makes you stronger than someone who's never been tested." Clara's throat tightened. She looked away into the darkness beyond the firelight. "You don't know anything about me. I know enough. I know you've been standing against that wall for years watching other women get chosen. I know you kept showing up anyway." "That takes a particular kind of stubborn." He stirred the fire again. "Stubborn's good in the mountains. Stubborn keeps you alive." They fell silent again. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Clara tensed, but Hale didn't react. "They won't come near the fire," he said. "And even if they did, I'm a light sleeper." "Have you ever—" Clara hesitated. "Mrs. Talbot said you killed a man once. Maybe more." Hale's expression didn't change. "Mrs. Talbot talks too much." "Is it true?" "Yes." The simple admission hung in the air between them. Clara's hand moved instinctively toward the knife at her belt. A small thing, mostly for cutting rope and meat, but better than nothing. Hale noticed. "I killed 3 men, actually. First one tried to steal my horses in the middle of winter. Second one attacked me with a knife over a disputed trap line. Third one—" his jaw tightened. "Third one had it coming." "That's not very specific." "It's all you need to know." He stood, brushing dirt from his pants. "Get some sleep. We leave at first light." He spread out his bedroll on one side of the fire, a clear demarcation. Clara did the same on the opposite side, keeping the flames between them. She lay awake for a long time, staring at stars visible through gaps in the tree canopy. She'd married a man who'd killed 3 people. A man who spoke about survival like other men spoke about the weather. A man who'd chosen her not for beauty or sweetness, but for her ability to endure. It should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time in years, Clara felt something else entirely. Needed. Not wanted, not desired, but needed. Maybe that was enough. Dawn came cold and gray. Clara woke to find Hale already up, fire rekindled, coffee brewing in a battered pot. He handed her a cup without comment. She drank it black. No sugar, no milk, just bitter warmth sliding down her throat. It tasted like purpose. They broke camp efficiently. Hale had clearly done this countless times, moving with an economy of motion that wasted nothing. Clara tried to match his pace, folding her bedroll the way he folded his, packing her bags in a similar configuration. He noticed. "You're observant." Seems smarter than asking 100 questions. "It is." He checked the horses' saddles, tightened a few straps. Most people need everything explained. They wait to be told instead of watching and learning. "I've had a lot of practice watching," Clara said quietly. Hale paused, something flickering across his face. Understanding, maybe. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual hard efficiency. "Let's move." The second day's ride was harder than the first. The trail, if it could still be called that, grew steeper and more treacherous. Several times they had to dismount and lead the horses through narrow passages between rocks or across swollen streams. Clara's body screamed in protest. Blisters formed on her hands from gripping reins. Her legs trembled from the constant strain. But she kept moving, kept matching Hale's relentless pace. Around midday, he called a brief halt near a small waterfall. They refilled canteens, let the horses rest. "How much farther?" Clara asked, splashing cold water on her face. "Another 6 hours if the weather holds." 6 more hours. Clara's body wanted to weep. Her mind refused to let it. "You're doing better than I expected," Hale said, surprising her. Compliments didn't seem like his style. "What did you expect?" "Complaints, tears, demands to turn back." "Would you have turned back if I'd asked?" "No." "Then what would be the point of asking?" That almost laugh again. "None. Which is why I picked you." They mounted up and continued. The terrain grew wilder, more beautiful in its brutality. Massive pines stretched toward a sky that seemed impossibly vast. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks still snow-capped despite the season. Clara had never seen anything like it, this raw, untamed world that cared nothing for human comfort. It should have felt hostile. Instead, it felt honest. Late afternoon brought them to a ridge overlooking a deep valley. Hale stopped, and Clara pulled up beside him. "There," he said, pointing. Clara followed his gesture. Far below, nestled against the northern slope, sat a small cabin. Smoke rose from its chimney. No, wait. There was no smoke. The cabin was dark, abandoned-looking. "That's home," Hale said. "Everything you see, the valley, the forest, the mountains beyond, that's ours. No one else comes here. No law but what we make. No help but what we provide ourselves." Clara studied the valley. It looked beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "How did you find this place?" "I was running from something, found this instead." He clicked his tongue, urging his horse forward. "Come on. I want to be inside before dark." The descent took longer than Clara anticipated. The trail switched back down the ridge, narrow and treacherous in places. Twice, Ash stumbled, and Clara's heart leaped into her throat. But the mare recovered each time, sure-footed despite the difficult terrain. As they reached the valley floor, Clara got her first close look at what would be her new home. The cabin was larger than it had appeared from above. Rough-hewn logs, a stone chimney, a covered porch. Sturdy, but plain. Behind it stood a small barn, and beyond that what looked like storage sheds. Everything was weathered, worn by years of harsh winters and hard use. Hale dismounted in front of the cabin, moving with visible stiffness. The long ride had aggravated his old injury. Clara slid off Ash, barely managing to stay upright. Her legs felt like water. "Barn first," Hale said, already leading his horse toward the structure. "Horses before comfort." Right, of course. Clara forced her protesting body to move, following Hale into the barn. It smelled of hay and leather and animal warmth, comforting smells, familiar despite the foreign setting. They worked in companionable silence, unsaddling the horses, brushing them down, checking hooves and distributing grain. Hale moved with practiced efficiency, and Clara matched him step for step, learning the routine through observation. By the time they finished, full dark had fallen. Hale lit a lantern and led the way to the cabin. The door stuck, swollen from summer moisture, and he had to shoulder it open. The hinges groaned. Inside, everything was still. Dust covered every surface, cobwebs hung in corners. The air tasted stale, unused. Clara realized with a start that Hale must have been gone for weeks, maybe months. "It's not much," he said, setting the lantern on a rough-hewn table. "But it's weather-tight, and the roof doesn't leak." Clara looked around. One large main room dominated the space. Kitchen area on one side, a massive stone fireplace on the other, a table and 2 chairs in the middle. A ladder led to what looked like a sleeping loft. Everything was functional, nothing decorative. A bachelor's cabin, built for survival, not comfort. "Where do I sleep?" she asked. Hale pointed to the loft. "Up there. I'll take the floor down here until we figure out arrangements." Arrangements? Right. They were married but strangers. He'd promised not to force himself on her, but eventually, Clara pushed the thought away. One thing at a time. "I'll start a fire," she said. "Get some warmth in here." Wood stacked on the porch, kindlings in the box by the hearth. Clara got to work. Building fires wasn't new to her. She'd done it countless times at the boarding house, in her own rented room during winter. But this fire felt different. This fire was the first act of making this cabin into something more than Hale's solitary refuge. This fire was the beginning of whatever came next. As flames caught and spread, casting dancing shadows across log walls, Hale appeared beside her with 2 tin cups and a bottle. "Whiskey," he said. "Not much of a wedding celebration, but it's what I've got." Clara took the cup he offered. "I don't need celebration." "No, but we should drink anyway." He poured generous amounts in both cups. "To survival." "To survival," Clara echoed. They drank. The whiskey burned going down, harsh and unforgiving, like everything else in this new life. But Clara didn't cough, didn't sputter, just swallowed the burn and held out her cup for more. Hale poured again, a slight smile tugging at his scarred face. "You'll do fine here." "You sound certain." "I am." He settled into one of the chairs, long legs stretched toward the fire. "You've got the look of someone who adapts, who figures out what needs doing and does it." Clara sat in the other chair, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "What happens tomorrow?" "We work. I'll show you the trap lines, the food stores, the well. You'll learn the routine. Then we'll start preparing for winter." "When does winter come?" 6 weeks if we're lucky, 4 if we're not." He stared into the fire. "It's brutal up here, snow deeper than you've ever seen. Temperatures that'll freeze flesh in minutes. Storms that last for days." "You're trying to scare me." "I'm trying to prepare you. There's a difference." Clara sipped her whiskey, letting the warmth spread through her chest. "I'm not easily scared." "Good." Hale stood, refilled both cups one more time. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow starts early." He moved to spread his bedroll near the fireplace, giving her privacy to climb to the loft. Clara drained her cup, set it on the table, and climbed the ladder. The loft was small but adequate. A mattress stuffed with what felt like straw, a few rough blankets, a single small window looking out over the valley. Clara pulled off her boots, wrapped herself in the blankets, and lay back. Below she could hear Hale moving around, banking the fire, checking the door, settling into his own bedroll. Then silence. Clara stared at the rough wood ceiling, processing everything that had happened in the last 36 hours. She'd gone from invisible to married, from unwanted to necessary, from the stifling predictability of Redemption Creek to the raw uncertainty of this mountain valley. Her old life was gone, completely, irrevocably gone. And she didn't miss it, not even a little. Outside, wind whispered through the pines. Inside, the fire crackled. And somewhere between those sounds, Clara finally slept, the first real sleep she'd had in years, because for once, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow would bring. She was ready for it. Dawn arrived with the sound of an axe biting into wood. Clara woke disoriented, her body screaming protest she'd never experienced before. Every muscle felt like it had been beaten with rocks. Her hands were so stiff she could barely make fists. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The valley, the cabin. Rowan Hale. She dragged herself to the loft's small window. Below, Hale was already at work, splitting logs with methodical precision despite the early hour. Each swing looked effortless, the axe rising and falling in a steady rhythm that spoke of years of practice. Clara checked the angle of sunlight filtering through the trees. Barely past dawn. How long had he been up? She climbed down the ladder, wincing with each movement. Her legs trembled on the rungs. Everything hurt. Hale glanced up as she emerged onto the porch, hair still tangled from sleep, still wearing yesterday's dusty clothes. "Coffee's ready," he said, nodding toward the cabin. "Drink it, then get changed into something you don't mind ruining. We've got a lot to cover today." No good morning, no how did you sleep, just straight to business. Clara poured herself coffee from the pot hanging over the rekindled fire. The brew was strong enough to strip paint, black as tar. She drank it anyway, feeling it burn away the cobwebs in her mind. She changed into her oldest dress, already worn thin at the elbows and hem. It was the kind of dress she'd saved for heavy work, the kind that didn't matter if it got destroyed. Looking at herself in the cabin's single cracked mirror, she looked like what she was, a woman preparing for hard labor. Good. When she stepped back outside, Hale had finished splitting the wood and was stacking it against the cabin wall. "Grab that bucket," he said, pointing to a wooden pail near the door. "Well's 50 yards that way. We'll need water for breakfast." Clara took the bucket and headed in the direction he'd indicated. Her legs protested every step, muscles still tight from yesterday's ride. The well turned out to be a simple stone structure with a rope and pulley system. She lowered the bucket, heard the splash, hauled it back up. The bucket came up full and impossibly heavy. She'd carried water before, countless times at the boarding house. But this bucket seemed to weigh twice what she remembered. Her arms shook as she lifted it, water sloshing over the sides. "Use your legs, not your back," Hale called from the woodpile. He wasn't even looking at her, somehow aware of her struggle anyway. "And don't fill it all the way. You'll just waste water spilling it." Clara gritted her teeth, dumped half the bucket out, and tried again. Better. Still heavy, but manageable. By the time she made it back to the cabin, Hale had a pan heating over the fire. He took the bucket from her without comment, poured some into the pan, set the rest aside. "Can you cook?" he asked. "Yes." "Good. Eggs and salt pork are in the cold box outside. Bring them in." Clara found the cold box, a small wooden structure built into the shaded north side of the cabin, designed to stay cool even in summer. Inside were eggs, salt pork, some kind of hard cheese, and vegetables that had seen better days. She brought what Hale had requested and watched as he cracked eggs into the now sizzling pan with one hand, added chunks of salt pork with the other. No wasted motion, everything efficient. "You do this every morning?" she asked. "Every morning I'm here." He stirred the mixture. "You'll take over cooking in a few days once you know where everything is." "I can start now." He glanced at her, something measuring in his eyes. "Fine. Tomorrow, it's yours. Today, watch." They ate standing up. No plates, just forks, and the pan between them. The food was simple, but filling, the salt pork providing a grease that made the eggs slide down easy. "Rule 1, Hale said between bites. "Nothing gets wasted. Food, water, firewood, time. We use everything or we save it. There's no surplus up here, no general store when we run short." "Understood." "Rule 2, we divide the work by skill, not by what's man's work or woman's work. I don't care what you did in town. Up here, if you can do it, you do it." Clara nodded. "What else?" "Rule 3, you see something that needs doing, you do it. Don't wait to be told. Don't wait for permission." He set his fork down. "I'm not your boss and you're not my servant. We're partners in survival. Act like it." Partners. The word settled into Clara's chest, warm despite the morning chill. They finished eating in silence. Hale cleaned the pan with sand and water, hung it back over the fire to dry. Then he turned to Clara with the kind of look a general might give troops before battle. "Today, I show you everything. The trap lines, the boundaries, the emergency supplies, the danger zones. Pay attention because I'm only explaining once. I'm ready. We'll see. They started with the immediate area around the cabin. Hale pointed out the cold box, the smokehouse, the root cellar dug into the hillside behind the cabin, the workshop where he repaired traps and tools. Each location came with instructions delivered in Hale's clipped, efficient manner. Cold box stays stocked. Check it daily. Anything spoiling gets used or thrown to the pigs. You have pigs? 3. In the pen past the barn. They eat scraps, provide meat in winter. Don't name them. Clara filed that away. What else? Root cellar holds winter stores, potatoes, turnips, carrots, dried beans. We'll harvest more in a few weeks, fill it completely. It's got to last us from first snow until spring thaw, 4 months minimum, sometimes 6. What if it doesn't last? Then we ration and hope, or we hunt, if the weather allows. He started walking toward the tree line. Come on, trap lines are next. The forest swallowed them within minutes. One moment they were in the clearing around the cabin. The next they were surrounded by towering pines and thick underbrush. Hale moved through it like water, finding paths Clara couldn't see. She struggled to keep up, branches catching at her dress, roots trying to trip her, but she kept moving, watching where Hale stepped, learning the rhythm of navigating wilderness. After 20 minutes, he stopped at what looked like a game trail, a narrow path worn through the underbrush by countless animal feet. First trap line starts here, he said, kneeling beside a carefully concealed steel trap. Runs 2 miles north, 30 traps total. I check it every other day during season, reset anything that's sprung. What are you trapping? Beaver, marten, fox, sometimes wolf if they're stupid enough. Pelts sell well in town, provide our cash income. He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. You'll learn to check these, reset them, skin what we catch. Clara looked at the wicked steel jaws of the trap. I've never skinned anything. You will. It's not hard, just messy. Most people quit because they're squeamish, not because they can't do it. I won't quit. Good. He set off again, pointing out landmarks as they walked. See that split pine? That marks the trail back to the cabin. Miss it, and you'll wander for hours. See those scratch marks on that trunk? Bear territory. We don't trap there, not worth the fight. Clara absorbed it all, committing every detail to memory. Split pine, bear marks, the way moss grew thicker on the north side of trees, the sound water made flowing over different types of rock. Everything might matter. Everything might save her life. They walked for hours. Hale showed her the second trap line running east, the third running south toward the ridge they'd descended yesterday. He pointed out edible plants, poisonous ones, the best places to find water, the areas that flooded during spring melt. You're memorizing all this, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. How? I watch. I remember. I've always been good at it. Clara paused to catch her breath, her legs burning from the constant uphill climb. When you're invisible, you learn to pay attention, see things others miss. Hale studied her for a long moment. You weren't invisible. People just weren't looking. Something in Clara's chest tightened. She looked away. Same result. No, it's not. He started walking again. See, invisible means you're not there. You were there. They chose not to see you. That's their failure, not yours. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They walked on in silence until Hale stopped at a small clearing where the ground dropped away suddenly, forming a steep cliff face. Danger zone, he said. 30-foot drop, rocky bottom. A fall here kills you. We don't come near this area during snow or rain. Too slippery. Clara peered over the edge, her stomach dropping. Far below she could see the creek winding through the valley, looking small as a ribbon from this height. Any other danger zones? 3 more. I'll show you tomorrow. Today's about the basics: water, food, boundaries. He checked the sun's position. We should head back. Still got work before dark. The return trip took half the time, Hale following a more direct route now that Clara had seen the trap lines. When they emerged from the forest, the cabin looked almost welcoming, smoke still rising from the chimney, the barn standing solid against the afternoon light. Hungry? Hale asked. Clara realized she was starving. Yes. There's jerky and cheese in the cold box. Eat, then meet me at the barn. I need to show you how we handle the animals." While Clara ate a quick meal of tough jerky and harder cheese, she watched Hale through the cabin window. He moved from task to task with the same methodical efficiency, checking fences, examining the barn's roof, testing the strength of a support beam. Everything he did seemed purposeful, nothing wasted. She finished eating and joined him at the barn. "We've got the horses, 3 pigs, and chickens," Hale said, opening the barn door. "Horses, you know. Pigs are simple. Feed them scraps twice a day, keep their pen clean. Chickens are your responsibility starting tomorrow." He led her to a coop attached to the barn's side. Inside, a dozen hens pecked at scattered grain, clucking softly. "Collect eggs every morning, feed them twice daily. Grain from the barrel in the barn. Watch for predators, foxes, hawks, coyotes. We lose chickens, we lose eggs, we lose a food source. How do I protect them? Keep the coop locked at night. Check the fence line weekly. If you see a predator, shoot it." He paused. "You know how to shoot?" "No. That changes today." Behind the barn, Hale had set up a makeshift shooting range, old tin cans arranged on a fallen log about 20 yards away. He produced a rifle from the barn, checked it with practiced ease, then handed it to Clara. "This is a Winchester, holds 15 rounds. You'll learn to load it, clean it, and hit what you aim at." The rifle was heavier than Clara expected, the wood stock smooth from years of use. She held it awkwardly, not sure where her hands should go. Hale moved behind her, adjusting her grip without asking permission. His hands were rough, scarred, but surprisingly gentle. "Butt against your shoulder, firm, or the kick will bruise you. Left hand here, supporting the barrel. Right hand on the grip, finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot." Clara tried to focus on the instructions, but she was acutely aware of his proximity, the heat of him behind her, the way his voice rumbled close to her ear. "See that middle can?" he asked. "Yes. Line up the sights, front and rear. Put that can right between them. When you're ready, take a breath, let half of it out, and squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. Squeeze." Clara did as instructed. "Breathe. Aim. Squeeze." The rifle cracked, the recoil slamming into her shoulder hard enough to make her stumble back. The can remained untouched. "Again," Hale said. She shot again. Missed again. The third shot went wide, kicking up dirt 5 feet left of the target. Frustration built in Claire's chest. She'd always been competent, always been able to learn quickly. But this? "Stop thinking," Hale said, as if reading her mind. "You're trying to force it. Just breathe and let it happen." 4th shot, 5th, 6th. On the 7th shot, one of the cans spun off the log with a satisfying ping. "There," Hale said, and Clara could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Do it again." She did. 8 shots later, she'd hit 3 more cans. Her shoulder ached, her ears rang despite Hale's warning to expect the noise, but she'd done it. "Good enough for now," Hale said, taking the rifle. "We'll practice every day until you can hit 9 out of 10. Up here, accuracy matters." "What if I can't get that good?" "You will. You've got steady hands and you don't flinch. That's half the battle." He started walking back toward the cabin. "The other half is just repetition." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Hale showed Clara how to split smaller logs for kindling, how to properly bank the fire for overnight burning, how to check the cabin's roof for damage. Every task came with instructions and expectations. By the time the sun began setting behind the western peaks, Clara's hands were covered in new blisters. Her back ached from bending and lifting, and her mind buzzed with information. They ate dinner, more salt pork, this time with beans Hale had soaking since morning, in comfortable silence. Clara was too exhausted to make conversation, and Hale didn't seem to need it. "First day?" he said finally, pushing his empty plate aside. "How do you feel?" Clara considered lying, then remembered Rule 3. Honesty. "Like I've been beaten with hammers, but I'll manage." "Your hands are bleeding." She looked down. He was right. Several blisters had burst, leaving raw skin exposed. She hadn't even noticed. Hale stood, disappeared into a corner of the cabin, returned with a small tin. "Salve. Use it every night or you'll get infection." Clara opened the tin. The salve smelled like pine and something else she couldn't identify. She dabbed it on her worst blisters, feeling the immediate sting followed by numbing relief. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep your hands functional. He refilled both their coffee cups. Tomorrow, we start preparing winter stores. I need to teach you canning, preserving, smoking meat. All in one day? We've got 6 weeks if we're lucky. That's not much time. Clara sipped her coffee, letting the reality sink in. 6 weeks to prepare for a winter that could last 6 months. 6 weeks to learn skills most people spent years developing. 6 weeks to transform from town woman to mountain survivor. I won't slow you down, she said. I know. Hale stared into the fire. You work harder than most men I've known. You'll do fine. The compliment, if it was a compliment, settled warm in Clara's chest. She wanted to say something, acknowledge it somehow, but Hale was already standing, stretching out the day's kinks. Get some sleep, he said. Dawn comes early. Clara climbed to the loft, her body protesting every step. She collapsed onto the straw mattress without even removing her boots. Too tired to care about comfort. Below, she could hear Hale moving around, banking the fire, checking the door, settling into his bedroll. The sounds were becoming familiar already, a routine taking shape. As she drifted toward sleep, Clara realized something had shifted. Yesterday, this cabin had been Hale's space, his refuge, his solitary existence. Today, it had started becoming theirs, not through any grand gesture or romantic declaration, but through work, through shared purpose, through the simple act of building survival together. It wasn't what she'd imagined marriage might be, but it was real, honest, something she could hold on to, and for Clara, that was more than enough. The next morning arrived with rain, a steady, cold downpour that turned the clearing around the cabin into a mud pit. Clara woke to the sound of it drumming on the roof, so loud it drowned out everything else. She climbed down to find Hale already working, this time inside the cabin. He'd spread various tools across the table, knives of different sizes, sharpening stones, oil, rags. Can't check trap lines in this, he said without preamble. So we work on maintenance. Grab that knife, the one with the bone handle. I'll show you how to sharpen it properly. They spent the morning on weapons care, sharpening knives, cleaning the rifles, oiling leather straps and holsters. Hale's hands moved with practiced precision, and Clara did her best to mimic his movements. Why so many knives? She asked, running a whetstone along a blade's edge the way he'd shown her. Different purposes. Skinning knife, hunting knife, fighting knife, kitchen knife, each one balanced for specific work. He tested the edge of the blade he was sharpening with his thumb. A dull knife is more dangerous than a sharp one. Remember that. By midday, the rain had slackened to a drizzle. Hale stood, joints cracking. Come on, time to teach you about the root cellar. They splashed through mud to the cellar entrance, a heavy wooden door set into the hillside behind the cabin. Hale pulled it open, revealing earthen steps leading down into darkness. Grab that lantern, he said. The cellar was cooler than outside, the air thick with the smell of earth and stored vegetables. Hale's lantern revealed shelves lining the walls, most of them distressingly empty. This should be full by first snow, he said, gesturing to the bare shelves. Potatoes, carrots, turnips, onions, dried beans, preserved meat, canned vegetables. Everything we'll need to survive when we can't leave the cabin for weeks at a time. Clara looked at the empty space, trying to imagine it filled. Where does it all come from? Garden out back, needs harvesting in 3 weeks. Hunting trips for meat, trading in town for what we can't grow or catch. He moved deeper into the cellar, pointing out different sections. Root vegetables here, they last longest. Canned goods here, dried meat here. Flour and grains in the sealed containers against the far wall. And if we run out, we don't. The way he said it left no room for argument. We ration carefully, we plan ahead, and we make it last. That's how survival works. They spent the next hour organizing what little was already stored, moving older items to the front so they'd be used first, checking for spoilage, making lists of what they'd need. Clara's mind cataloged everything. 50 pounds of flour left, 20 pounds of beans, root vegetables for maybe 2 weeks. Not nearly enough. We have a lot of work ahead of us, she said. Yes. Hale closed the cellar door behind them, sealing out the cool darkness. which is why we start today, not tomorrow. That afternoon, despite the rain, Hale showed Clara the garden, a large plot behind the cabin, currently overgrown with weeds but showing signs of vegetables struggling beneath. "This should have been tended all summer, he said, disgust clear in his voice. "I was gone too long. Now we've got to salvage what we can." They waded into the muddy plot, pulling weeds by the armful. The rain had slackened to a mist, but everything was soaked. Clara's dress, her hair, her boots sinking into the mud with every step. It was miserable work. Cold, wet, back-breaking. Her hands cramped around the weeds, her knees ached from kneeling in mud. Water dripped steadily down her neck. But underneath the struggling weeds, Clara found treasures. Potato plants heavy with tubers, carrots thick as her wrist, onions that had somehow survived neglect. Each discovery felt like victory. "Look at this one," she called, holding up a massive carrot. Hale glanced over, something like approval crossing his face. "Good eye. That whole section might be salvageable." They worked until dark, harvesting what they could, clearing space for the plants that needed more time. By the time they trudged back to the cabin, both were covered in mud, exhausted, and oddly satisfied. "Clean up," Hale said, gesturing to the bucket of water he'd left warming by the fire. "I'll start dinner." Clara stripped off her muddy dress down to her shift, too tired to care about modesty. She washed quickly in the warm water, scrubbing mud from her hands and face, then changed into her only other dress, the one she'd worn to the selection. It felt strange putting on something relatively clean, like wearing a costume. Hale had his back turned, giving her privacy as he cooked. When she was decent, he washed up as well, equally efficient and unconcerned about appearances. Dinner was potatoes and onions from their afternoon harvest, fried with the last of the salt pork. Simple, but after a day of hard labor, it tasted like luxury. "You did well today," Hale said. Clara looked up, surprised. 2 compliments in as many days. That might be a record. "The garden will recover," he continued. "Between what we harvested and what's still growing, we'll have enough root vegetables for winter. We'll need to supplement with hunting, but it's a start." "What about everything else, the canning you mentioned?" "Tomorrow. If the rain stops, we'll hunt. Deer if we're lucky, rabbit if not. Anything we get, you'll learn to preserve." They fell into silence again, the comfortable kind that came from shared exhaustion. Clara watched Hale across the fire, the stranger she'd married, trying to reconcile what she'd imagined with what actually was. He was hard, blunt, completely lacking in social graces. He ordered more than he asked, instructed more than he conversed. But he was also fair. He taught without condescension. He expected much but gave credit when it was earned. And he'd never once made her feel weak for being a woman, only held her accountable for being a partner. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said. Hale glanced up. "Yes." "Why were you in town? You said you weren't planning to attend the selection." He was quiet for so long Claire thought he might not answer. Then, "Supplies. I come down every few months, sell pelts, buy what I can't make or grow. I was leaving when I heard about the selection." He poked at the fire. "Wasn't planning to look. Then I did." "And you saw me." "I saw you standing there, looking at everyone else like you'd already accepted this wasn't for you, like you'd made peace with being alone." He met her eyes across the flames. "I know that look. I've worn it myself." Claire's throat tightened. "So you thought, what? 2 lonely people might as well be lonely together?" "I thought 2 capable people might survive better as a team than struggling alone." He set down his coffee cup. "I don't have romantic notions about marriage, Clara. I'm not offering you love or devotion or any of that nonsense, but I'm offering you partnership, honesty, a chance to build something that matters. And if it's not enough, then we'll both survive anyway, because that's what we do." He stood, stretching. "But I think it will be. I think you'll find purpose here you never had in town." He was right, Clara realized. She already had. In town, she'd been superfluous. An extra person no one needed, contributing nothing that mattered. Here, every task she completed had immediate, visible impact. The vegetables she'd harvested would feed them through winter. The skills she was learning would keep them both alive. She wasn't just occupying space, she was essential. That night, As Clara lay in the loft listening to rain on the roof and Hale's quiet breathing below, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope of the selection hall, not the bitter hope that tomorrow might be slightly less terrible than today. Real hope. The kind that came from knowing you had purpose, had capability, had a place in the world that was yours because you'd earned it. She fell asleep with mud still under her fingernails and blisters forming new layers on her palms, more content than she'd been in a decade. The rain continued through the night and into the next morning, but lighter now, less urgent. Hale decided they could risk checking the closest trapline if they were careful. "Stay close," he warned as they set out. "Ground's slippery. You fall and break something, we're in trouble." Clara followed him into the dripping forest, stepping where he stepped, watching for the hazards he'd shown her before. The world looked different in rain, colors muted, sounds dampened, everything slightly off kilter. They found the first trap empty but sprung. Hale reset it, muttering about wasted time. The second held a fox, dead for at least a day, the pelt already starting to spoil. "Damn." Hale removed the carcass roughly. "Should have checked yesterday, rain or no rain." "Is it salvageable?" "No. The pelt's ruined." He tossed the dead fox into the underbrush. "That's $40 we just lost because I stayed inside where it was warm." Clara heard the anger in his voice, not at her, but at himself. She said nothing, knowing sometimes silence was better than platitudes. They continued down the trap line. The third trap held a beaver, freshly caught, pelt still good. Hale dispatched it quickly, efficiently, then showed Clara how to remove it from the trap without damaging the fur. "Watch," he said, his hands moving with practiced skill. "Release here, lift here, check for damage." Clara watched, memorizing every movement. This would be her responsibility eventually. She needed to learn. By the time they'd checked all 30 traps, they had 2 beavers and a marten. Good haul, considering the weather. Hale seemed pleased, the earlier frustration fading. Back at the cabin, he laid the carcasses on the work table in the barn and handed Clara a skinning knife. "Now you learn the messy part." He guided her through the first beaver, where to cut, how deep, how to separate skin from flesh without tearing. It was delicate, disgusting work. Blood stained her hands, the smell was overwhelming, and more than once Clara had to swallow against nausea. But she didn't quit, didn't look away, just kept cutting where Hale told her to cut, learning through doing. "You're doing fine," he said when she paused, uncertain. "Most people can't stomach this the first time." "I can't either, but I'm doing it anyway." That's the difference between surviving and quitting. He took the knife, demonstrated a tricky cut around the beaver's leg. "See? Like that. Now you try." By the time she finished the first beaver, Clara's hands were shaking and her stomach was in knots. But the pelt lay intact on the table, ready for processing. Hale examined it critically. "Good work. Clean cuts. Minimal damage. You'll get faster with practice." They spent the rest of the day processing all 3 animals, skinning, stretching the pelts to dry, butchering the meat for food, rendering fat for candles and cooking. Nothing wasted. Everything used. That night they ate fresh beaver meat, rich and gamey, like nothing Clara had tasted before. Hale showed her how to render the fat properly, how to store the bones for broth, how to check the drying pelts for proper tension. More skills. More knowledge. More building toward survival. As Clara climbed to the loft that night, hands scrubbed clean but still smelling faintly of blood and fur, she realized she'd crossed another threshold. She wasn't just learning to live here. She was becoming someone who belonged here, someone capable of the hard, necessary work that made survival possible. The woman who'd stood invisible at the selection hall seemed like a stranger now, someone from another life, someone who'd never skinned a beaver or shot a rifle or spent hours knee-deep in mud harvesting vegetables. That woman was gone. In her place stood Clara Hale, and she was just getting started. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm of relentless work. Clara's hands developed calluses thick enough that blisters no longer formed. Her arms grew stronger from hauling water, splitting wood, carrying harvested vegetables from the garden. Her aim improved until she could hit 7 out of 10 cans, sometimes 8. The skills Hale taught her became second nature. Skinning animals without thinking, banking fires properly, reading weather patterns in the way clouds gathered over the western peaks. The cabin transformed around them. The root cellar filled steadily. Potatoes stacked in careful rows, carrots buried in sand, onions braided and hanging from hooks. Shelves that had been empty now groaned under the weight of preserved food. Smoked meat hung in the smokehouse, wrapped carefully against insects and rot. Dried herbs bundled on the cabin rafters, filling the air with sage and thyme. They worked from dawn until dark, barely speaking except to coordinate tasks. Hale would gesture toward the trap lines and Clara would nod, understanding he needed her to check them while he hunted. She'd return with whatever the traps had caught, process the animals while he butchered a deer or elk, and by nightfall they'd have added more to their winter stores. It should have been lonely, this silent partnership, but Clara found something oddly comfortable in it, the way they moved around each other without collision, anticipated needs without asking, built their survival through action rather than words. Then the morning came when Clara woke to frost covering the loft window. She climbed down to find Hale already dressed, staring out the cabin door at a world transformed. White covered everything, not snow yet, but heavy frost that made the grass brittle and the trees look skeletal. "How early is this?" Clara asked, joining him. 3 weeks early. His jaw was tight. "Winter's coming fast. Are we ready?" Hale was quiet for a long moment. "Close, but we need meat, a lot of it. 1 deer won't be enough." "Then we hunt." He glanced at her. "It's a 3-day trip to the elk grounds. Hard travel, cold camps. You've never done anything like it. So teach me." Something shifted in his expression, respect, maybe, or recognition. "Get your warmest clothes. We leave in an hour." They packed light but efficient. Bedrolls, dried food, ammunition, knives, rope. Hale brought both rifles, handed one to Clara without ceremony. "You're responsible for this now, Ek," he said. "Keep it clean, keep it loaded, keep it close." Clara took the Winchester, feeling its familiar weight. 3 weeks ago, it had been foreign and frightening. Now it felt like an extension of her arm. They rode north, deeper into the mountains than Clara had yet traveled. The terrain grew steeper, the air colder. By midday, their breath came out in visible clouds. Hale led them along narrow game trails that Clara would never have found on her own, following signs she was only beginning to recognize. Tracks in soft earth, broken branches, scat deposits that told him what animals had passed and when. "There," he said suddenly, pointing to a ridge above them. "Elk! At least a dozen." Clara squinted, but saw nothing. "Where?" "Left of that dead pine. See the movement?" She stared harder and finally caught it, dark shapes moving against darker trees, barely distinguishable. "How did you spot that?" "Practice. You'll learn." He dismounted, tied his horse to a low branch. "We go on foot from here. Stay behind me, step where I step, and for the love of everything, don't make noise." They climbed for an hour, moving with agonizing slowness. Every footfall had to be perfect, every breath controlled. Clara's legs burned from the constant upward climb. Her lungs ached from the thin air, but she kept moving, kept silent. Hale stopped behind a boulder, gestured for Clara to crouch beside him. When she did, she could finally see the elk clearly, massive animals grazing in a high meadow, their breath steaming in the cold air. "The bull," Hale whispered, so quiet Clara barely heard him. "The big one on the right. I'll take him. You take the cow at the edge if you get a clean shot." Clara's heart hammered. "You want me to shoot?" "You can hit 7 out of 10 cans. An elk's bigger than a can. You'll manage. But I've never... First time for everything." He was already positioning his rifle, settling into a shooting stance. "Wait for my shot. If she runs, let her go. If she hesitates, take her." Clara's hand shook as she raised her rifle. The cow he'd indicated stood broadside, perfect target, completely unaware of the danger. She looked peaceful, just eating grass, living her life. Clara's finger found the trigger. Hale's rifle cracked, impossibly loud in the mountain silence. The bull elk dropped instantly, dead before it hit the ground. The rest of the herd exploded into motion, except the cow Clara was aiming at. She froze for just a second, head up, trying to locate the threat. Clara squeezed the trigger. The recoil slammed into her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw the cow stumble, recover, take 3 running steps, then collapse. "Move!" Hale barked, already running toward the fallen bull. "We've got maybe an hour before predators smell the blood." The next hour was chaos. Hale worked with brutal efficiency, gutting the massive bull elk while Clara did her best with the cow. Her hands shook so badly the first few cuts were clumsy, wasting meat, but Hale didn't criticize, just called instructions across the meadow while working on his own kill. Cut deeper. Get past the hide. Don't puncture the intestines. Clara gritted her teeth and cut deeper. Blood soaked her sleeves, her front pooled around her knees. The smell was overwhelming, copper and meat, and something wilder, more primal. But she kept working, kept cutting. Because this was survival. This was what kept them alive. By the time they'd field-dressed both animals and loaded as much meat as the horses could carry, the sun was setting and Clara's entire body trembled with exhaustion. "Can we make it back tonight?" she asked. Hale shook his head. "Too dangerous in the dark. We camp here. Leave at first light." They made a cold camp. No fire. Nothing that would attract predators to their meat stores. Hale strung the elk quarters high in a tree, out of reach of bears and wolves, then spread their bedrolls beneath it. Clara ate dried venison and tried not to think about how cold it was getting. Frost was already forming on their bedrolls. "Here," Hale tossed her his extra blanket. "You'll freeze without it." "What about you?" "I've slept in worse." He settled into his bedroll, rifle across his chest. "Get some sleep. We've got hard travel tomorrow." But sleep wouldn't come. Clara lay shivering despite 2 blankets, her body still processing what she'd done. She'd killed something, taken a life. The cow's eyes had been brown, she remembered, soft and confused in those last seconds. "You're thinking too much," Hale said from across the camp. "How do you know?" "I can hear you not sleeping." He shifted in his bedroll. "You want to talk about it?" "About what?" "Your first kill." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Does it get easier?" "No, it gets necessary." His voice was matter-of-fact in the darkness. "I don't enjoy killing, but I do it because the alternative is starving. You'll make the same choice every time because that's what survival demands. And that makes it right? It makes it reality. Right and wrong don't mean much when you're hungry enough." Clara thought about this. "The men you killed, was that survival too?" Hale was quiet for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "The first 2, yes. They threatened my life, I defended it. The third," he exhaled slowly, "the third one hurt someone I cared about. That was revenge, not survival. I'm not proud of it. But you'd do it again." "Yes." The honesty of it struck Clara. No justification, no explanation, just truth. "Who was it?" she asked. "The person he hurt." "My sister." Hale's voice went flat. "She came to visit, back when I first moved here. Wanted to see if I was really doing as well as I claimed in my letters. On the ride back to town, she met him, a trapper who thought a woman alone was easy prey." Clara's stomach clenched. "What happened?" "She fought. Hard enough that he left her alive, just broken." The words came slowly, painful. "She made it back to town, told me everything. I found him 3 days later. And killed him. And made sure he understood why he was dying." Hale shifted again. "The law didn't care. Out here, men like him get away with things because there's no one to stop them. I stopped him." Clara understood something then about the man she'd married. He wasn't violent by nature, but he was absolute in his protection of what mattered to him. There were lines you didn't cross, and if you did, there were consequences. "Where's your sister now?" Clara asked. "Back east, married to a banker, 3 children, safe life." There was something wistful in his voice. "She writes sometimes. Tells me I should come visit, meet my nieces and nephews. I never go." "Why not?" "Because I'm not that person anymore. The brother she remembers is gone. What's left is this." He gestured vaguely at the darkness, the mountains, himself. "Out here, being hard keeps you alive. But it's not something you bring to a parlor full of children." Clara wanted to argue, to tell him he was more than just his hardness. But she stayed quiet, because maybe he was right. Maybe the mountains did change you into something that couldn't exist in soft places. Maybe she was changing too. They lay in silence for a while, listening to wind through the pines and the distant howl of wolves. "Clara," Hale said eventually. "Yes?" "You did well today. The kill was clean. The field dressing was passable. You didn't complain, didn't quit. He paused. I'm pleased you came with me. It was the closest thing to affection he'd ever expressed. Claire's throat tightened. I'm pleased too, she said quietly. No more words after that. Just the cold mountain night and two people who'd chosen each other for the most practical of reasons discovering that maybe, just maybe, it was becoming something more. Clara finally slept and dreamed of brown eyes and clean kills and a future she couldn't quite see but was building anyway, one hard choice at a time. They made it back to the cabin by late afternoon the next day, both horses laden with more meat than Clara had thought possible. Hale immediately set about preparing it for smoking and preservation while Clara tended the exhausted animals. Over the next week, they processed every ounce of elk. Clara learned to cut meat into strips for smoking, render fat for tallow, scrape hides for eventual tanning. Her hands stayed permanently stained with blood. Her clothes reeked of smoke. But the smokehouse filled with hanging meat and the root cellar gained precious fat stores. This might be enough, Hale said one evening, surveying their supplies with critical eyes. If we're careful. And if we're not? Then we hunt in winter, which is dangerous and often unsuccessful. He closed the root cellar door. We're careful. The next morning brought the first real snow. Clara woke to absolute silence, the strange, muffled quiet that came with heavy snowfall. She looked out the loft window and gasped. The world had disappeared under white. Not the light dusting she'd seen in town, but massive accumulation that buried the fence posts and bent tree branches under impossible weight. Hale! She called down. He emerged from his bedroll, took one look out the window, and swore. That's 2 feet at least, maybe 3. Is that normal? For midwinter, yes. For now? He was already pulling on boots. We need to check the barn, make sure the roof doesn't collapse. Then we dig paths to the well, the root cellar, the smokehouse. They worked for hours in the bitter cold, shoveling snow that seemed determined to bury them. Clara's shoulders screamed, her back felt like it might break, but she kept shoveling because the alternative was being trapped. The barn roof held, barely. They reinforced it with extra beams Hale had stored for emergencies. The chickens were fine, the pigs annoyed but safe. The horses needed reassurance but settled once fed. By the time they'd finished clearing paths, both were soaked with sweat despite the cold. Inside the cabin, Hale built up the fire while Clara changed into dry clothes. This is just the beginning, he said, standing by the window and watching more snow fall. Real winter hasn't even started. Clara joined him, staring at the transformed landscape. Everything looked different, alien, beautiful in its hostility. Are you afraid? She asked. Hale considered this. Respectful. Winter up here demands respect. Fear just makes you stupid. That night, as wind howled and snow continued to fall, Clara realized how isolated they truly were. No neighbors for days, no town to retreat to, just this cabin, these supplies, and each other. It should have been terrifying. Instead, sitting by the fire while Hale repaired a broken harness and Clara mended clothes, it felt almost peaceful, like they'd carved out a space in the wilderness that was theirs alone, defended against the world by walls of wood and stores of food and the simple fact of their combined stubbornness. Tomorrow, we check the trap lines, Hale said. Snow or no snow, pelts are worth more in winter. I'll be ready. He glanced at her over the harness. I know you will. The trapline checks became brutal routine. Every other day, regardless of weather, they'd bundle into every layer they owned and trudge through snow that sometimes reached Clara's waist. Hale would break trail, Clara would follow, and together they'd check each trap, reset what had sprung, collect what they'd caught. The catches were good, winter pelts thick and valuable. Fox, marten, even a few wolves stupid enough to investigate the traps. Each pelt was processed, stretched, stored for the eventual trip to town, if they could get to town. The snow kept coming. 3 weeks after that first snowfall, Clara woke to find the cabin darker than usual. She climbed down to investigate and found Hale already at the door trying to force it open. It's stuck, he said, putting his shoulder into it. Clara joined him. Together they shoved, and the door finally burst open, revealing a wall of snow. It had drifted against the cabin overnight, completely blocking the entrance. Damn, Hale breathed. That's 4 feet at least. They spent the morning digging out, creating a tunnel through the drift just to reach open air. By the time they finished, both were exhausted, and it wasn't even midday. "We need to watch the roof," Hale said, staring up at the cabin. "That much snow has weight. If it builds up..." A crack echoed across the valley. They both froze, looking around for the source. Another crack, louder this time, and Clara saw it, a massive pine at the edge of the clearing bending under snow weight. "Move!" Hale grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the cabin just as the tree gave way with a sound like breaking bones. It fell in slow motion, massive trunk arcing through the air, branches reaching toward them like skeletal fingers. Clara couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only watch it come down. Hale tackled her, driving them both into the snow just as the tree crashed down where they'd been standing seconds before. Branches whipped overhead. Snow exploded around them, and then silence. Clara lay gasping, Hale's weight pressing her into the cold. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "You hurt?" he asked, already pushing up to check the damage. "I don't think so." The tree had missed the cabin by maybe 10 feet. Branches had torn into the porch, ripping away one of the support posts, but the structure held. "That was too close," Hale said, breathing hard. "We're clearing more trees tomorrow, snowbound or not. Can't risk another one falling." But the next morning brought worse problems. Clara descended from the loft to find Hale hunched by the fire, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing. I'm fine." "You're lying." She moved closer. "Let me see." He tried to wave her off, but she was persistent. Finally, he lifted his shirt to reveal an ugly bruise spreading across his ribs, purple and black and swollen. "When did this happen?" Clara demanded. "Yesterday, when we fell." He lowered the shirt. "It's just bruised. Or broken. You don't know. Doesn't matter. Work still needs doing." But when he tried to stand, he couldn't fully straighten. Pain flickered across his face before he could hide it. Clara felt something cold settle in her stomach. Hale injured in the dead of winter, miles from any help. This was the nightmare scenario he'd warned her about. "Sit down," she said, voice firmer than she felt. "I'll handle the morning work." Clara'd say, "Rule 3. I see something that needs doing, I do it." She met his eyes. "You said we're partners. Partners step up when the other one's down." He wanted to argue. She could see it. But pain won out over pride, and he sat. Clara fed the fire, made coffee, then bundled up and headed out into the snow alone. The chickens needed feeding. The horses needed tending. The paths needed clearing where snow had drifted overnight. Each task took twice as long without Hale's help, but Clara worked through them methodically, the way he'd taught her. When she returned to the cabin, Hale was still sitting by the fire, looking frustrated and helpless. "I checked the animals," Clara reported. "Everyone's fine. Paths are clear. I'll check the trap lines tomorrow." "You can't check them alone. If something happens, then I'll handle it. The same way you'd handle it." She poured them both coffee. "You need to rest or those ribs won't heal, and if they don't heal, we're both in trouble." Hale stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. 3 days? I'll rest 3 days? Then I'm working again, whether I'm healed or not. We'll see. Those 3 days tested Clara in ways she hadn't anticipated. Managing everything alone meant working from dawn past dark. The trap lines had to be checked. She forced herself through waist-deep snow, following the routes Hale had shown her, resetting traps with freezing fingers. The animals needed constant care in the brutal cold. The fire had to be maintained, meals cooked, paths kept clear as more snow fell. And through it all, she had to keep an eye on Hale. Make sure the injury wasn't getting worse, wasn't becoming something more serious than bruised ribs. The second night, she woke to the sound of labored breathing below. Clara climbed down to find Hale burning with fever, his skin slick with sweat, his breathing shallow and pained. "No," she whispered, feeling panic rise for the first time since arriving at the cabin. "No, no, no!" She cooled him with snow wrapped in cloth, forced water between his cracked lips, layered blankets when he shivered, removed them when he burned. All night she tended him, watching helplessly as fever consumed him. By dawn, the fever hadn't broken. Clara stood by the window, staring at endless snow, feeling more alone than she ever had in Redemption Creek. Out there, she'd been invisible but safe. Here, she was essential, but terrified. If Hale died, she'd be completely alone. Miles from help, buried under snow, with winter just beginning. The practical part of her brain cataloged options. She could try to make it to town, but in this snow on her own, she'd die before traveling a mile. She could stay here, manage alone, but without Hale's knowledge and strength, she'd likely starve before spring. Or she could fight, keep him alive through sheer stubborn refusal to lose the only partner she'd ever had. Clara made her choice. She brewed willow bark tea for the fever, forced it down his throat even when he couldn't fully wake. She kept him warm, kept him hydrated, checked his ribs for signs of infection. And she kept working, because the animals still needed tending, the fire still needed feeding, survival still demanded its daily toll. On the third day, Hale's fever finally broke. He woke clear-headed, weak but lucid, and found Clara collapsed in the chair beside him, asleep sitting up after 3 days of barely resting. "Clara," he rasped. She jerked awake, immediately checking his forehead. Cool. The fever was gone. "How long?" he asked. 3 days. Her voice was hoarse from exhaustion. "You had fever. I thought—" She stopped, unable to finish. Hale's hand found hers, the first time he'd voluntarily touched her beyond necessity. His palm was rough, scarred, but warm with life. "You kept us going," he said. "I didn't have a choice." "You did. You could have panicked. Given up. Tried to run." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "You didn't. You fought." Something in Clara's chest cracked open. Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed burned behind her eyes. "I wasn't going to let you die," she said fiercely. "Not when we've come this far." Hale pulled her down, gently, carefully, until she was sitting on the edge of his bedroll. Then, slowly, he wrapped his arms around her and let her cry into his shoulder. For the first time since meeting him, Clara felt him offer comfort instead of just partnership. Felt his hand stroke her hair, heard him murmur that she'd done well, that they were fine, that he was grateful. When she finally pulled back, embarrassed by the display, Hale's expression was soft in a way she'd never seen. "We're going to make it," he said. "How do you know?" "Because you're stronger than winter, stronger than anything this valley can throw at us." He squeezed her hand. "I chose well." Clara laughed, the sound watery but real. "So did I." They sat there as morning light filtered through the window. Two survivors who'd chosen each other for practical reasons, discovering that somewhere along the way, practical had become personal. And Clara realized that for the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. Hale recovered slowly, stubbornly insisting on working even when his ribs still screamed with every breath. Clara learned to read the subtle signs, the way he'd pause before lifting something heavy, the careful way he moved in the mornings, the tight line of his mouth when pain broke through his control. She didn't coddle him. He would have hated that. But she took on the heavier tasks without comment, split the wood before he could attempt it, hauled the water before dawn so he wouldn't feel obligated to do it himself. He noticed, of course. Hale noticed everything. "You're managing me," he said one morning, watching her stack firewood he would normally have handled. "I'm managing the work," Clara corrected. "Same thing I'd expect you to do if our positions were reversed." He grunted, acknowledging the truth of it, and went back to mending a harness. Work that required skill, but not strength. The days shortened as winter dug in deeper. By afternoon, darkness crept across the valley, and by evening, the world outside became absolutely black. They lived by firelight and lamplight, their existence condensing into the warm circle of the cabin's interior, while the wilderness pressed against the walls. It was during one of these long evenings, snow falling steady outside, that Clara realized she'd miscounted. She sat at the table doing mental calculations, counting back through the weeks since the selection, since their wedding, since the last time she'd had her monthly bleeding. The numbers didn't work. She was late, very late. Claire's hand stilled on the shirt she'd been mending. Her heart did something complicated in her chest, part fear, part something she couldn't name yet. "You all right?" Hale asked from his spot by the fire. "Fine." The word came out too quick, too tight. He looked at her properly then, that assessing gaze that missed nothing. "You're a terrible liar." "I'm not lying, I'm just—" Clara set down the mending. "I need to think." She stood and climbed to the loft, needing space, needing to process what this might mean. Behind her, she heard Hale shift, heard his footsteps on the ladder. "Clara!" His voice came from just below the loft edge. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I just need a minute." In the middle of mending, without finishing, he pulled himself up into the loft despite his ribs, face set with determination. "Tell me." Clara sat on the edge of the mattress, hands twisted together. The truth sat heavy on her tongue, half certainty, half terror. "I think I might be pregnant," she said quietly. Hale went completely still. In the lamplight filtering up from below, his expression was unreadable. "You think or you know?" he asked finally. "I'm 6 weeks late. I'm never late." Clara forced herself to meet his eyes. "I know." The silence stretched between them, filled with implications neither had planned for. They'd been careful, or at least Hale had been careful, but careful wasn't the same as certain, and one night, about a month ago, when the cold had been brutal and they'd shared the loft for warmth, careful had given way to something else entirely. Neither of them had spoken about it since. It had seemed easier to pretend it was just survival, just two people seeking warmth in the bitter cold. Now there were consequences. "Say something," Clara said when the silence became unbearable. Hale scrubbed a hand over his face. "A baby. In winter. In the mountains." He looked at her. "Do you understand how dangerous that is?" "I understand better than you think." Clara's voice hardened. "I know what childbirth looks like. I know women die from it even with doctors present. I know having a baby out here, alone, with no help." She stopped, swallowing hard. "Yes, I understand. And you're—" He seemed to struggle with the question. "You're not angry? About this?" "Angry at who? You?" Clara shook her head. "We both made choices. I knew what could happen. But you didn't plan for it." "I didn't plan for any of this. The selection, the marriage, the valley, none of it was planned." She placed a hand over her still flat stomach. "But I'm here anyway. And if there's a baby, then that's part of survival too." Hale moved to sit beside her on the mattress, careful of his ribs. For a long moment, he just stared at his hands. "My mother died in childbirth," he said finally. "I was 10. I watched my father try to save her, watched him fail. The baby died too. My brother would have been." His jaw worked. "I swore I'd never put a woman through that." Clara's throat tightened. "You didn't put me through anything. I made my own choices. But now you'll suffer the consequences, or reap the rewards." She took his scarred hand in hers. "I'm not your mother, Rowan, and this isn't that same story." He looked at her then, really looked, and Clara saw fear in his eyes, raw and honest in a way he'd never shown before. "I can't lose you," he said roughly. You've become—" He stopped, seemingly unable to finish. "I know," Clara said softly. "You've become that for me too." He pulled her against him, careful but firm, and they sat like that while snow whispered against the roof and the fire crackled below. Two people who'd married for survival discovering they'd somehow built something worth protecting. "We prepare," Hale said finally. "I'll teach you everything I know about childbirth. It's not much, but it's something. We gather supplies. We make plans." His arms tightened slightly. "And we make damn sure you survive this." "We," Clara repeated. "I like that." Over the following weeks, their partnership shifted into something deeper. Hale became almost gentle, not soft, never soft, but attentive in ways he hadn't been before. He noticed when Clara grew tired more easily, when certain smells made her nauseous, when she needed to rest but was too stubborn to admit it. And Clara learned to accept help, something that had never come naturally. When Hale took over the trapline checks entirely, she let him. When he insisted she eat more of the meat rations, she didn't argue. When he began researching childbirth in an old medical book he'd kept stored away, she sat beside him and learned alongside him, no matter how terrifying the information became. The book was brutally honest about what could go wrong. Breech births, bleeding, infection. The list of potential disasters seemed endless. "We should go to town," Clara said one night after reading a particularly horrifying passage about hemorrhaging. "Find a doctor. Stay there until the baby comes." "In this snow? We'd never make it." Hale closed the book. And even if we did, town doctors lose mothers too. Maybe more than out here, with their dirty tools and their arrogance. So what do? We learn. We prepare. And when the time comes, we handle it. He stood, moved to the supplies they'd been gathering. I've delivered foals, calves, even helped with a human birth once when I was younger. It's not the same, but the principles are similar. That's not reassuring. It's realistic. He began sorting through the clean cloth they'd been setting aside. I won't lie to you about the risks, but I also won't let fear stop us from doing everything possible to make this work. Clara watched him organize supplies with the same methodical care he brought to everything. Thread for stitching if needed, alcohol for sterilization, clean cloths for the birth itself, herbs the medical book claimed could help with pain and bleeding. He was building a plan, creating a framework they could follow when the chaos came. It was what he did, took impossible situations and made them manageable through preparation and sheer stubborn will. "You're going to be a father," Clara said, the words feeling strange but true. Hale paused in his organizing. "Yes. Are you happy about it?" He considered this carefully. "I'm terrified, but—" He looked at her, something warm in his usually cold eyes. "But yes. Underneath the fear, there's something else. Something good." "Love?" Clara suggested quietly. "Maybe. I'm not sure I remember what that feels like." He set down the supplies and came to her. "But whatever this is, what I feel for you, for this future we're building, it matters. More than anything has mattered in a long time." Clara stood, took his face in her hands, and kissed him properly for the first time since that night in the loft. He kissed back, gentle but certain. And for a moment the fear receded under the simple truth of two people choosing each other again and again. When they pulled apart, Hale rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to make it through this. Promise?" "I promise I'll fight like hell to make sure we do." It was the best promise he could give. Honest, realistic, and completely committed. Clara found it more comforting than any pretty words could have been. January brought the worst of winter's fury. Storms rolled through the valley with terrifying frequency, each one dumping more snow, driving temperatures so low that water froze inside the cabin despite the roaring fire. They burned through wood at an alarming rate, and Hale spent hours each day just keeping them from being buried alive. Clara's body changed, her belly beginning to swell with undeniable evidence of the life growing inside. She tired more easily, her back ached constantly, and some mornings she couldn't keep food down no matter how carefully she ate. But she worked anyway, because work was what kept them alive. She tended the animals, cooked their meals, maintained the cabin while Hale fought the elements outside. They developed a rhythm, a partnership so synchronized they rarely needed to speak to coordinate. Until the day the roof began to crack. Clara was preparing dinner when she heard it, a groan of stressed wood, followed by an ominous creaking sound. She looked up just as Hale burst through the door, covered in snow. "Get the support beams from the barn," he said urgently. "The roof's giving way under the snow weight." They worked in desperate tandem, Hale climbing into the rafters while Clara handed up the beams he needed to reinforce the sagging roof. Outside, more snow fell, adding weight by the minute. "It's not enough," Hale said, surveying their work. "I need to get on the roof, clear some of the weight. In this storm, you'll freeze. If the roof collapses, we'll both die. I don't see a choice." He was right, and they both knew it. Clara helped him bundle into every layer they owned, wrapped cloth around his face to protect against frostbite, and watched him climb out the window onto the roof with a shovel. The next hour was agony. Clara stood below, listening to the scrape of shovel against roof, the thud of snow hitting the ground, Hale's labored breathing as he worked. She fed the fire high, kept water hot for when he came back, and fought the urge to climb up after him. When he finally tumbled back through the window, he was shaking violently, ice coating his beard and eyebrows. Clara pulled him to the fire, stripped off his frozen layers, wrapped him in every blanket they owned. "Stupid," she muttered, rubbing warmth back into his hands. "Stupid, stubborn man." "Stupid alive man," he corrected through chattering teeth. "Roof held. Barely." But she kept rubbing, kept warming him, until the violent shaking subsided and color returned to his face. That night, They slept in the same bedroll for warmth, Clara's growing belly pressed against Hale's side, his arms wrapped protectively around both her and their unborn child. It felt natural now, this closeness. What had started as convenience had become comfort, and comfort had become something neither of them could name but both recognized. "When this is over," Hale murmured into the darkness, "when winter breaks and spring comes, I'm taking you to town, getting you proper supplies, a real doctor to check on you and the baby. We might not make it before the baby comes. Then we go after. But I want you to have options, Clara. Want you to have help if you need it. I have you. That's enough." His arms tightened slightly. "You deserve more than enough. You deserve everything." Clara smiled into the darkness. Months ago, Hale had chosen her because she looked strong enough to survive. Now he was promising her everything and meaning it. February arrived with slightly shorter storms and marginally warmer days. Not warm by any reasonable measure, still well below freezing, but enough that Hale could venture out to check the trap lines without risking death. Clara was 5 months along now, her belly unmistakable, her movements growing more awkward. Simple tasks became complicated. Climbing to the loft required effort. Bending to tend the fire left her breathless. Her body was transforming into something foreign, something focused entirely on the life she carried. Hale noticed everything, adjusting their routine to accommodate her changing capabilities without making her feel useless. He moved her work to ground level, brought things to her instead of making her fetch them, and took over the tasks that required bending or climbing. "I'm not helpless," Clara protested one morning when he insisted on collecting the eggs himself. "No, you're pregnant. Different thing." He handed her a knife and a pile of vegetables. "You can sit and do this instead." Clara wanted to argue but couldn't find fault in his logic. She sat, chopped vegetables, and tried not to feel frustrated by her body's limitations. That afternoon, while Hale was checking the northern trap line, Clara felt it, a flutter in her belly, so subtle she almost missed it. Then it came again, stronger this time. Movement. The baby moving. She pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling the tiny kicks and rolls. Life. Undeniable, persistent life. When Hale returned hours later, Clara grabbed his hand and placed it on her belly without explanation. He looked confused until the baby kicked again, strong enough that he felt it through her dress. His eyes went wide. "That's our baby," Clara finished. "Very much alive and apparently very active." Hale kept his hand there, feeling the movements, his expression cycling through wonder and fear, and something that looked suspiciously like joy. "It's real," he said quietly. "It's been real for months." "I know, but—" He searched for words. Knowing and feeling are different things. The baby kicked again, as if responding to his voice. Hale laughed, actually laughed, a sound Clara had heard maybe twice in all their months together. "Strong," he said. "Takes after you." "Stubborn," Clara corrected. "Definitely takes after both of us." They sat like that for a while, Hale's hand on Clara's belly, feeling their child move and kick and announce its presence to the world. Outside, winter still raged. Inside, life persisted against all odds. March brought the first signs of spring, slight warming during the day, though still freezing at night. The snow began to settle and compact, no longer gaining height with every storm. Hale started talking about the thaw, about when they might be able to travel to town. But Clara's body had different plans. She was 7 months along when the pains started. Not labor pains, the book had made those clear enough, but sharp cramps that doubled her over and left her gasping. "Something's wrong," she said, clutching her belly. Hale helped her to the bedroll, his face pale. "Describe it." "Cramping. Low, like—" She gasped as another wave hit. "Like my body's trying to push the baby out too early." He grabbed the medical book, flipping frantically to the section on premature labor. "You need to stay off your feet completely. No work, no movement unless necessary." He looked up. "The book says bed rest sometimes stops it." "For how long?" "However long it takes." So Clara stayed in the bedroll, horizontal and helpless, while Hale managed everything alone. He brought her food, helped her with humiliating necessities, sat beside her reading from the medical book, or talking about anything except the fear they both felt. The cramping continued for 3 days before finally subsiding. When it stopped, Clara felt wrung out, exhausted, and more frightened than she'd been since arriving at the cabin. Too early, she whispered. The baby can't come yet. It's too early. Then we keep you still until it's not too early. Hale brushed hair back from her face. Whatever it takes. 2 more weeks passed with Clara essentially imprisoned in the bedroll. The enforced stillness drove her half mad, but every time she tried to get up, Hale was there, gently but firmly insisting she stay put. I'm going to lose my mind, she complained on day 12. Better than losing the baby. He brought her soup, helped her sit up enough to eat it. Just a few more weeks, then it'll be safe. You don't know that. No, but I'm choosing to believe it anyway. Clara studied his face, the worry he tried to hide, the determination that never wavered. You're scared. Terrified, he admitted. But that doesn't change what needs doing. On the 15th day of bed rest, Clara felt the baby kick hard enough to be visible through her dress, a tiny foot or fist pushing against the confines of her belly. She grabbed Hale's hand, pressed it to the spot. Feel that? That's a fighter. She met his eyes. Our baby's fighting to stay in there until it's time. We just have to trust it. And if we can't, then we fight too, same as we've fought everything else. April arrived with genuine warmth. The snow began melting in earnest, creating rivers of runoff that made travel treacherous but possible. Hale started talking seriously about getting Clara to town before the baby came. But Clara was 8 months along now, huge and uncomfortable, and the thought of riding for 3 days over rough terrain seemed impossible. I don't think I can make it, she admitted. Not on horseback, not like this. Hale had clearly been thinking the same thing. Then we do it here. We've prepared, we have supplies, we have the book. We can do this. People die from childbirth, Rowan. Strong, healthy women with doctors present. And people survive it in worse conditions than this. He took her hands. I won't promise it'll be easy, but I promise I'll do everything I can to keep you both alive. Clara looked around the cabin, this space they'd built together, survived in together, made into a home through sheer determination and shared stubbornness. If she was going to bring a baby into the world, maybe here wasn't the worst place. Maybe here with Rowan was exactly where she needed to be. All right, she said, we do it here. The last month of pregnancy felt endless. Clara was huge, swollen, constantly uncomfortable. Sleep came in brief snatches between trips to relieve her aching bladder. Her back screamed constantly. The baby seemed determined to kick her ribs into submission, but Hale was there through all of it, patient in ways she'd never imagined, gentle despite his rough exterior. He massaged her aching back, brought her water in the middle of the night, talked to the baby through Clara's belly, and told it stories about the mountains. You're going to be a good father, Clara said one night, watching him talk to her stomach about the trap lines and how to read animal tracks. I'm going to try. He looked up at her. That's all I can promise. It's enough. 2 weeks before May arrived, Clara woke in the middle of the night to wetness and a sharp, unmistakable contraction. Her water had broken. Labor had begun. And there was no going back now. Rowan, Clara's voice cut through the darkness, sharp with urgency and pain. It's time. He was awake instantly, years of light sleeping in dangerous country making him alert before his eyes fully opened. One look at Clara, the way she gripped her belly, the wetness soaking through her nightdress, and he understood. All right. His voice stayed calm even as his heart hammered. It's all right. We prepared for this. The book said first babies take hours, Clara said through gritted teeth as another contraction rolled through her. Please let the book be right. Hale lit every lamp they had, turning the cabin into an island of light against the darkness. He'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in his head, cataloged every supply they'd need, memorized the medical book's instructions until he could recite them in his sleep. Theory was one thing. Clara's labored breathing and the fear in her eyes was something else entirely. I need you to move to the clean bedding, he said, helping her stand. They'd prepared a birthing area near the fire, layered with their cleanest sheets, everything within arm's reach. Can you walk? I can walk. Clara made it 3 steps before another contraction hit, this one strong enough to double her over. Maybe not well, but I can do it. They made it to the prepared area together. Hale helped her settle, tried to remember everything the book said about early labor. Keep her comfortable. Time the contractions. Don't panic. The last one was proving difficult. Talk to me, Clara said, clearly seeing the fear he was trying to hide. Tell me about something, anything. Just keep talking. Hale grabbed the clean cloth they'd boiled yesterday, wiped sweat from her forehead. What do you want to hear? Tell me about your sister, the one back east. Another contraction. Clara breathed through it, eyes squeezed shut. What's her name? Margaret, Meg. Hale kept his hands busy, kept his voice steady. 3 years younger than me. Stubborn as hell, which is probably why she survived what happened to her. What's she like now? Happy, I think. Her letters talk about her children mostly. Hannah, Elizabeth, and James. She sends drawings sometimes. Crayon scribbles the kids make? He smiled slightly. Last letter, she said Hannah wants to be a trapper like her uncle. Her husband wasn't pleased. Clara laughed, then gasped as another contraction hit. They were coming faster now, maybe 10 minutes apart. Hale marked the time, trying to calculate how long this might last. Hours. The book said hours for first births, sometimes a full day. They had time. He just had to keep Clara calm and himself functional. I'm scared, Clara admitted when the contraction passed. I know you need me to be brave, but I'm terrified. Good. Fear keeps you focused. Hale brushed hair back from her face. And you don't have to be brave. You just have to survive. That's what you're good at. What if I can't? Then I'll help you. That's what partners do. The contractions intensified as dawn broke outside, painting the cabin windows with weak spring light. Clara paced when she could, gripped Hale's hands when the pain was too much, breathed through each wave the way the medical book recommended. Hale stayed beside her through all of it, his calm presence the only thing keeping her from complete panic. He timed contractions, checked her progress as best he could with shaking hands, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. By midday, the contractions were 5 minutes apart, and Clara couldn't walk anymore. She knelt on the bedding, hands braced against the floor, making sounds she'd never made before, primal animal sounds of effort and pain. It's too much, she gasped between contractions. I can't. You can. You are. Hale knelt behind her, supporting her weight. Just keep breathing. Keep pushing when your body tells you to. The book said hours. It's been hours. Why isn't... The words dissolved into a scream as another contraction tore through her. Hale had never felt more helpless in his life. He could trap animals, survive blizzards, kill men who threatened what was his. But this, watching Clara suffer, knowing he couldn't take the pain for her, this was a different kind of hell. I need to check, he said when the contraction passed. See how close the baby is. Clara nodded, too exhausted to argue. Hale washed his hands in the hot water they'd kept ready, said a silent prayer to nothing in particular that he'd know what he was seeing, and checked. His breath caught. He could see the baby's head, actually see it. Clara, you're close. So close. Maybe another hour. I don't have another hour. But she bore down when the next contraction hit. Her whole body focused on the single task of bringing this baby into the world. Hale had delivered foals and calves, talked a panicked father through his wife's labor once when he'd been younger, but those experiences hadn't prepared him for this, for watching someone he loved fight for 2 lives at once, for the sheer brutal reality of birth. The next hour was chaos. Clara screamed, pushed, begged for it to be over. Hale supported her, encouraged her, lied, and told her she was doing great when she looked like she was dying. The cabin filled with sounds of struggle, smelled of blood and sweat and fear. And then, impossibly, the baby's head emerged fully. One more, Hale said, hands shaking as he supported the tiny head. One more push, Clara. I can see the head. I can't. You can. You have to. His voice went hard, commanding. Now, Clara. Push now. She pushed with everything she had left, and the baby slid free into Hale's waiting hands, tiny, perfect, covered in blood, and screaming with all the fury of a mountain storm. A girl. They had a daughter. Hale's hands moved on instinct, clearing the baby's mouth and nose, making sure she was breathing properly. The book had said to cut the cord, tie it off. His hands shook so badly he could barely manage the knots, but he did it, separated mother from child for the first time. Clara, he said, his voice breaking. Clara, it's a girl. We have a daughter. Clara reached for the baby with trembling arms. Hale placed their daughter on her chest, wrapped them both in clean blankets, and watched as Clara's face transformed from pain to wonder. The baby stopped crying the moment she felt her mother's skin, her tiny fists curling against Clara's chest. She was impossibly small, fragile in ways that terrified Hale, but unmistakably alive and apparently furious about the whole birth experience. "She's perfect," Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She's healthy," Hale corrected, but he was crying too, something he hadn't done since he was a child. "You both are. You did it." But they weren't done yet. The afterbirth still had to come, and Clara was bleeding, more than Hale liked, though he tried not to let his fear show. He worked quickly, following the book's instructions, massaging Clara's belly to encourage her womb to contract, watching the blood flow and praying it would slow. It took 20 minutes that felt like hours, but finally the bleeding slowed to something manageable. Clara delivered the afterbirth with minimal fuss, clearly too exhausted to care about anything beyond the baby in her arms. Hale cleaned up the worst of the mess, got Clara into clean clothes, made sure both she and the baby were warm and safe. Only then did he let himself collapse beside them, his body shaking with adrenaline and relief. "We did it," Clara said, her voice hoarse from screaming. "We actually did it." "You did it. I just caught." Hale reached out, carefully touched his daughter's tiny hand. She gripped his finger with surprising strength, her eyes opening to stare at him with unfocused newborn vision. She had Clara's nose, his dark hair, and lungs that suggested she'd inherited both their stubborn spirits. "What do we name her?" Clara asked. Hale thought about his mother, who died bringing life into the world, about his sister Meg, who'd survived against odds, about Clara herself, who'd been overlooked and dismissed and had proved everyone wrong. "Margaret," he said, "after my sister, if that's all right with you." "Maggie," Clara said, testing the name. The baby made a small sound as if approving. Margaret for formal. Maggie for everyday. Maggie Hale. Hale felt something shift in his chest, some final wall crumbling. "Welcome to the world, little one. You picked a hell of a place to be born." The first week was brutal. Maggie nursed constantly, screamed when she wasn't nursing, and apparently had opinions about everything from her swaddling to the temperature of the cabin. Clara was exhausted, still recovering from birth, her body a mess of pain and strange changes. But she kept going. Fed Maggie every 2 hours, changed her, soothed her, learned the language of cries that meant hungry versus tired versus just generally displeased with existence. Hale handled everything else. He cooked, cleaned, tended the animals, and took Maggie for brief periods so Clara could sleep. He was terrified every time he held her, convinced his rough hands would somehow break this tiny creature, but he did it anyway because Clara needed rest. "You're good with her," Clara said one evening, watching Hale walk the floor with a fussy Maggie against his shoulder. "I'm adequate with her, she tolerates me." But he was smiling slightly, one massive hand supporting Maggie's tiny head, the other patting her back in a gentle rhythm. "She loves you. Look at her." Maggie had indeed stopped fussing, her dark eyes wide and focused on Rowan's face. She made small sounds, not crying, just talking in the way babies did, sharing observations about her brand new world. "She's trying to understand why everything's so big," Hale said seriously, as if he could actually interpret baby sounds. "And why her hands won't do what she wants. Very frustrating when you're a week old." Clara laughed, the sound rusty from exhaustion, but genuine. "You're making that up." "Am I?" "Look at her face. That's clearly frustration." Maggie chose that moment to spit up all over Hale's shoulder. He didn't even flinch, just grabbed a cloth and cleaned them both up like he'd been doing it for years instead of days. "Definitely frustration," he said, "with digestion, apparently." That night, with Maggie finally sleeping in the small cradle Hale had built during Clara's pregnancy, they sat by the fire in comfortable silence. Clara was still sore, still healing, but the worst was over. They'd survived the birth. Maggie was healthy. They were all alive. "I was thinking," Hale said, "about going to town. Once you're healed enough to travel. To show off Maggie? To get you both checked by a real doctor. Make sure everything's healing properly." He poked at the fire. "And to get supplies we'll need. Cloth for diapers, proper baby clothes, medicine in case she gets sick." Clara understood what he wasn't saying. They'd made it through birth, but raising a child in the wilderness came with different dangers. Disease, accidents, 100 things that could go wrong. When? She asked. Another month. Give yourself time to recover. Maggie, time to get stronger. He looked at her. And it'll give me time to build a better cradle, one we can strap to a horse. You've thought about this. I've thought about nothing else since she was born. His voice went rough. I need you both safe. Whatever that takes. 3 weeks later, Clara felt strong enough to walk around the clearing without exhaustion. Maggie had grown noticeably, her tiny features becoming more defined, her periods of alertness lasting longer. She was starting to smile, or at least Clara insisted the facial expressions were smiles and not just gas. Hale had built a traveling cradle, tested it extensively to make sure it would stay secure on horseback. He'd packed supplies carefully, everything they might need for 3 days of travel plus time in town. Are you sure about this? Clara asked the morning they planned to leave. It's a long trip for someone so small. She's stronger than she looks. Takes after her mother. Hale secured the last of their supplies. And we need to do this while the weather's good. Another month and summer storms will make travel dangerous. They left at dawn, moving slowly to accommodate Clara's still healing body and the precious cargo strapped to Ash's saddle. Maggie slept through most of the first day, lulled by the rocking motion. When she woke and needed feeding, they stopped without complaint, making camp early to give Clara time to rest. The journey that had taken 2 days when Clara first came to the valley now took 4. But they made it, riding into Redemption Creek on a warm May afternoon with a baby girl who'd been born in the wildest country most people would never see. The town hadn't changed. Same dusty streets, same buildings, same people going about their predictable lives. But Clara had changed completely. The woman who'd ridden out of here 7 months ago, invisible, unwanted, desperate, no longer existed. In her place rode Clara Hale, mountain woman, mother, survivor. People stared as they passed. Mrs. Henderson actually stopped in the middle of the street, mouth open in shock. Samuel the matchmaker looked like he'd seen a ghost. Polk, the rancher who'd made the cutting remark about needing a wife, not a field hand, stepped out of the general store and stopped dead. Well, he said, taking in Clara's confident posture, the healthy baby, Rowan's protective presence. Didn't expect to see you alive. Most people don't expect much from me, Clara said evenly. I keep surprising them. She didn't wait for his response, just guided Ash toward the doctor's office while Hale followed, a slight smile on his scarred face. The doctor was a tired-looking man named Patterson, who'd seen everything frontier life could throw at him. He examined Maggie thoroughly, pronounced her remarkably healthy for a baby born in the wilderness, and seemed genuinely impressed. Most women wouldn't survive childbirth in those conditions, he said, checking Clara over next. You're healing well. No signs of infection, no complications. Whatever your husband did, he did it right. She did most of it herself, Hale said from his corner. I just caught. Patterson smiled. That's usually how it works. But still, you both should be proud. This little one's a fighter. They bought supplies they couldn't make or grow. Medicine, cloth, a few luxuries Clara had forgotten existed. She bought real coffee, sugar, a mirror that didn't have cracks. Hale bought books, medical texts and farming guides and stories he could read to Maggie when she was older. That evening, staying in the boarding house where Clara had once rented a room, Mrs. Talbot hovered in the doorway looking apologetic. I owe you an apology, she said. I said terrible things when you left, about Mr. Hale being dangerous, about you making a mistake. You weren't entirely wrong, Clara said, nursing Maggie in the privacy of their room. He is dangerous, and marrying him was absolutely a mistake by conventional wisdom. But you're happy. Clara looked at Rowan, who was organizing their purchases with his usual methodical care, at Maggie, who nursed contentedly, safe and healthy, at the life they'd built from nothing but stubbornness and partnership. Happy isn't the right word, she said. Content. Purposeful. Alive in ways I never was here. She met Mrs. Talbot's eyes. I'm not glad for how it happened, but I'm glad for where I ended up. Mrs. Talbot nodded, seeming to understand. You look different, stronger. I am different. The valley changes you. They left town 2 days later, supplies restocked, Maggie examined and declared thriving. The ride back felt different than the ride out, less like fleeing toward uncertain future, more like returning home. Because the cabin in the valley was home now. Not the building itself, but what it represented. A place they'd built together. A life they'd carved from wilderness through sheer determination. A family they'd created not because it was expected or traditional, but because they'd chosen each other again and again. As they crested the final ridge and the valley spread below them, green with late spring growth and alive with possibility, Clara felt something settle in her chest. She was home. Not invisible. Not unwanted. Not desperate. Just Clara Hale. Exactly where she was meant to be. The years that followed were marked not by grand events, but by the steady accumulation of living. Maggie grew from tiny newborn to crawling baby to walking toddler with more determination than sense. She said her first word at 8 months, Dada, which made Hale's eyes suspiciously bright. She took her first steps at 10 months, immediately falling and giving herself a black eye that had both parents panicking until the doctor book assured them black eyes were normal for adventurous children. Clara's body recovered fully from childbirth, her strength returning along with the rhythms of mountain life. She and Hale worked their land, expanded the garden, built additional storage for the growing amount of food they'd need to feed a child. The cabin itself grew, an additional room added when Maggie turned 2, a better barn built when they acquired 2 cows and more chickens. The partnership that had started as cold transaction had evolved into something neither of them could quite name. Love seemed too simple a word for what they'd built. It was love, yes, but also respect, trust, and the deep knowledge that came from surviving impossible things together. They fought sometimes, usually about stupid things made large by exhaustion and isolation. Hale could be stubborn and controlling. Clara could be sharp-tongued and unwilling to admit when she was wrong. But they always worked it out because the alternative was unthinkable. When Maggie was 3, Clara realized she was pregnant again. "You're sure?" Hale asked, though he could probably see it in her face. "As sure as last time." Clara placed a hand on her still flat stomach. "Due in winter again, apparently. We have terrible timing. Or perfect timing. We know what we're doing now." He was right. The second pregnancy was easier because it wasn't unknown. The second birth was faster, less terrifying, though still brutal in its own way. And when their son entered the world on a cold December night, screaming his fury at existence, both parents just laughed. They named him James, after Hale's father who'd tried to save his mother all those years ago. 2 children. A cabin that felt lived in and loved. Land that provided for them year after year. And 2 people who'd been overlooked by the world, discovering they'd built something more valuable than beauty or charm could ever provide. When Maggie was 7 and James was 4, they took the whole family to Redemption Creek for supplies. The children had never seen a town before, and their wide-eyed wonder at things Clara and Rowan took for granted, streets, stores, crowds of people, made both parents smile. Mrs. Henderson approached them in the general store, older now, but still kind. "Clara Hale," she said warmly, "and these must be your children." Maggie and James. Clara watched as her daughter examined bolts of fabric with serious concentration while James tried to climb a shelf display. "They're beautiful. You look happy." Clara glanced at Rowan, who was negotiating with the shopkeeper about winter supplies while simultaneously preventing James from destroying the store. At Maggie, who'd inherited her mother's sharp mind and her father's stubborn determination. At this life they'd built from absolutely nothing. "I am," she said simply. "Turns out being chosen wasn't what I needed. Building something worth keeping, that was the answer." "Not everyone finds that." "No," Clara agreed, "but the ones who do usually had to fight for it." As they prepared to leave town, Polk appeared, older, grayer, but still with that same cutting edge to his voice. "Heard you're doing well up in the valley," he said to Hale. "2 kids, good land, making it work." "We are." Polk looked at Clara, something grudging in his expression. "I was wrong about you. That day at the selection. Said you'd make a field hand, not a wife." "You were half right," Clara said pleasantly. "I'm an excellent field hand. Also happen to be a good wife, good mother, and generally more capable than you gave me credit for." She smiled, sharp and satisfied. "But I appreciate you admitting you were wrong. That takes character." They left him standing there, speechless, and rode out of town with supplies and satisfaction in equal measure. The ride home took 3 days with children in tow. Maggie rode with Clara, chattering about everything she'd seen in town. James rode with Rowan, alternating between sleep and demands to know when they'd be home. When they finally crested that familiar ridge and saw the valley spread below them, both children cheered. They'd been gone less than a week, but to them it felt like forever. That night, after the children were asleep and supplies were stored and the routine of home had reasserted itself, Clara and Rowan sat by the fire as they'd done countless times before. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked. "Choosing me that day?" Rowan considered this seriously, as he considered everything. "No. You?" "Not for a second." Clara leaned against his shoulder. "I regret that it took desperation to get me here, but I don't regret where I ended up." "We did well," Rowan said quietly. "Two broken people who found each other and built something whole." That was it exactly. They'd both been broken in different ways, Rowan by loss and isolation, Clara by years of being invisible. Together they'd healed what could be healed and learned to live with what couldn't. The cabin stood strong around them, filled with the sounds of sleeping children and crackling fire. Outside, the valley slept under stars, wild and beautiful and home. Clara Whitlock Hale, the woman no one chose, had built a life that would outlast all the people who'd overlooked her. Not through beauty or luck or someone else's charity, but through her own strength, her own choices, her own stubborn refusal to disappear. Years later, when Maggie was 16 and preparing to make her own choices about life, she asked her mother about the selection hall, about being overlooked, about how it felt to be invisible. Clara thought about it carefully before answering. "Being invisible taught me to see clearly," she finally said. "When no one's watching you, you see everything. You learn who people really are, what they really value. And you learn that being overlooked isn't the same as being worthless." "But it must have hurt." "It did. Every single time." Clara looked at her daughter, strong, confident, never invisible because she'd been raised to know her worth. "But pain teaches you things comfort never could. It taught me to value substance over appearance, partnership over romance, building something real over waiting to be chosen." "Do you think I should wait to be chosen?" Maggie asked. "Or should I choose?" Clara smiled. "I think you should build something worth having. The right person will want to build it with you, and the wrong people—" She shrugged. "Let them overlook you. Their loss, not yours." Maggie hugged her mother, this woman who'd survived against odds and taught her children that strength came in forms the world didn't always recognize. Clara held her daughter and thought about the journey from that dusty selection hall to this moment, about Rowan, who'd seen capability where others saw only plainness, about the valley that had demanded everything and given back a life of purpose, about two children who would never know what it felt like to be invisible because they'd been raised to see and be seen. The woman no one chose had built everything that mattered, and that was worth more than being chosen ever could have been. The fire burned low as evening settled over the valley. Inside the cabin, James practiced reading while Maggie helped her father repair a harness. Clara prepared dinner, moving through the familiar routines of a life hard-won and deeply valued. Outside, mountains stood eternal and indifferent. Inside, a family thrived. And somewhere in Redemption Creek and dusty selection halls, other women stood waiting to be chosen, not knowing yet that sometimes the best thing that could happen was being overlooked by the wrong people. Because only then could you find the strength to choose yourself. Only then could you build something real. Only then could you discover that being wanted was nice, but being needed, truly needed, as an equal, as a partner, that was everything. Clara Hale had learned that lesson the hard way, and she wouldn't trade a single moment of the struggle.